let me just see what I have. Oh, without objection, the member from Nevada, Representative Amadei, is authorized to question the witnesses in today's hearing. I also want to say that all other members' opening statements, as I pointed out, will be part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess, subject to the call of the chair. Pursuant to committee rule, let me just get that. Pursuant to committee rule 3L and the latest guidance from the attending physician, anyone present in the hearing room today must wear a mask covering their mouth and nose if they are not fully vaccinated, or if they are uncomfortable with informing us of their vaccination status. It is my hope that with everyone's cooperation, we can protect the safety of members and staff and their families so that they can return to them at home. The committee has masks which are available for any member who needs one. I think now I'm going to just look down at my notes. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform the committee staff immediately. I'm now going to begin my opening statement. The mining law of 1872 is one of the most obsolete laws still on the books. It's a complete relic, written for an outdated version of the American West when it has not been settled. And I can tell you, as a member from California, the West has been settled. And it was written at a time that about a mining industry that no longer exists. The days of a solitary miner heading out with a pickaxe and a shovel are long behind us, but the 150-year-old law regulating that miner is still the very same law expected to hold multi-million-dollar multinational corporations accountable on our public lands today. This is outrageous. According to the latest data, the mining industry has taken in over $82 billion worth of minerals out of the ground last year, and that's just the best estimate we have because we don't have great records because of that bill. Yet they pay no royalties to the American people, and our public land managers have little or no say where mining companies can and cannot operate. There is no other industry that enjoys the same privileged, exalted status on our public lands. Not the coal industry, not oil and gas industry, not the renewable energy industry, not even outdoor recreation. No other industry has the same level of free access to our public lands, which belong to all Americans. Just yesterday, the Government Accountability Office confirmed in a new report there is no country in the world that still regulates their mining industry using the same outdated statement that we use here in the United States. Yet we claim to be a leader a global leader, that is, in environmental regulations. Now, yes, there have been other environmental protection laws that have been updated since 1872. Mining companies have to comply with the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, known as Stigma, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the Clean Water Act, among others. But none of these laws help land managers plan for the specific environmental challenges that come with hard rock mining. And the relevant federal regulations at both the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service haven't been upgraded in decades. As the title of today's hearing suggests, the current framework just isn't getting the job done. There are an estimated 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines littering the country, posing safety threats and polluting thousands of miles of river streams with toxic runoff. Federal agencies don't even have a full inventory of all the abandoned mines on the federal lands they manage. 50 million gallons of toxic wastewater, the equivalent of 20,000 tanker trucks, flow out of hard rock mining sites every day. And 40% of streams feeding western watersheds are polluted by abandoned hard rock mine runoff. And as we'll hear from some of our witnesses today, more must be done to protect sacred sites and to ensure meaningful consultation with sovereign tribal nations. We can and must do better. Not only is this a question of basic fairness for the American people and for our environment, but it's how we can build a more sustainable, clean energy future. I think there's a lot of agreement with my colleagues on some of these issues. They are correct that minerals like copper, lithium, and nickel are essential for many renewable energy technologies, including electric vehicles. And I also agree with my colleagues that it is in our national security interest to have more domestic sources of critical minerals, especially given the global dominance of China in this industry. I want to make it clear today that I am supportive of new mining when and if we are going to expand domestic mining, when it is done in a way that meets the highest environmental standards, provides a fair return to the American public, and respects to the American people, fair return to the American people, and respects tribal sovereignty. I'm proud to support the Biden administration's recent efforts to help us better strike that balance through their recent executive order on supply chains. I'm also very supportive of additional federal research into ways we can better recycle and reuse existing minerals that we're trying to reduce the overall need for critical minerals in the first place. Before I recognize Ranking Member Stauber, I want to emphasize that we can find a win-win here as we look to reform the mining law of 1872. But we're going to need the mining industry, tribes, environmental organizations, and members of Congress from both sides of the aisle to come to the table to get there. I look forward to working together to find that balance. With that, I look forward to the testimony today from our witnesses. And now I recognize Ranking Member Stauber for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chair Lowenthal. You know, although today was not the day we could be in person, I am looking forward to it happening very soon. And I look forward to working with Democrats on this panel on as many topics as possible. Unfortunately, today's topic does not seem to be one where Democrats are seeking to work together. Using the term, quote, toxic, end quote, in the hearing title to characterize an entire industry does not inspire confidence in the majority's intentions here. Mining is the past, present, and future of northern Minnesota and this country. My district has alone provided the ore needed for 80% of this country's steel. We now have the opportunity of a lifetime. We have 95% of our country's nickel, 88% of its cobalt, and more than 1/3 of its copper, along with platinum group elements, rare earths, and many others, just in my district alone. As our witnesses will testify today, President Biden's 100-day supply chain report at least provides lip service to understanding these needs, stating that, quote, strategic and critical minerals are the building blocks of a thriving economy and a strong national defense. These supply chains are at serious risk of disruption and are rife with political intervention, end quote. And these are not Republican talking points. This is the administration seemingly acknowledging the need for a robust domestic mining sector. Yes, this very same administration remanded a permit for the PolyMet project on year 19 of its permitting process. And after the closure of a Michigan mine in 2024, there will be no domestic nickel production, increasing our import reliance to 100% for a mineral that we have an abundance of. Meanwhile, as we speak, a rider to ban mining in my district outright is included in the House Interior Spending Bill, instead of a regular order where that type of legislating would go through this committee. Section 435 was included as a backroom poison pill. In contrast, I have submitted 8 different amendments seeking to clean up our tainted critical mineral supply chains, which includes children mining cobalt by hand and the communist country of China with a chokehold on global refining and processing capabilities. Democrats blocked every single one of these amendments. Mr. Chair, it is very challenging to seriously consider proposals when the majority and the administration offer only domestic mining bans, slow walk permits at the urging of radical activists, and describe the industry that powers my district as, quote, toxic, end quote. Yes, we have scars of our past. Before environmental laws were signed by Republican President Richard Nixon, there was little to no thought to the environment. Therefore, I look forward to discussing creative ways to clean up abandoned hard rock mining sites. However, I reject the notion that we have a blanket, quote, toxic legacy, end quote. Reclaimed iron ore mines provide drinking water for entire communities in my district. You can swim and fish in our reclaimed mines. We should not be considering proposals that are nothing more than a de facto ban. Hard rock minerals are locatable for a reason. It takes millions and millions of dollars of investment and research to, number one, find the ore, permit the mine the ore, process the ore, and sell the ore. The nonpartisan International Energy Agency predicts global mineral development will have to increase 6-fold in the coming years to feed our hunger for electric vehicles, and continued upgrades to our grid. If we upend the leasing system, raise the royalty crippling high, and continue to take federal lands offline, we will be forced to continue to import resources from abroad and not put domestic miners to work. Just a month ago, I held up 2 poster boards when Interior Secretary Haaland appeared in front of the full committee. One was then candidate Biden before the election committing to domestic mining. The second was the Biden administration after the election stating they preferred foreign miners and to purchase these minerals from foreign nations. I asked then, and I ask now, does the majority and the administration prefer importing minerals from abroad or sourcing them with our own workers? Because I know the answer. I support our miners. I support our industry. We can do it better than anyone else in the world. Mining is a key to a brighter future. Remember our need for cell phones, laptops, electric vehicles, water infrastructure, solar panels, windmills, and of course, national defense will not decline. It will only increase. I therefore urge my Democratic colleagues to turn down the rhetoric, ignore the quote, keep it in the ground, end quote, radicals, and stop offering lip service and discuss serious proposals to boost our mining and our economy. We can do it here. We have the resources, we have the workforce, and we have the technology. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, ranking member Stauber. I now recognize our full committee chair, Representative Grijalva. Chair Grijalva, welcome to the subcommittee. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal, for holding the hearing today, and thank all our witnesses that are with us today. And as you pointedly said, Mr. Chairman, the discussion going forward is not about banning mining on public assets, but to bring mining from the 19th century into the 21st century, where public participation, respect for the trust responsibility to indigenous people and tribes is respected and adhered to, and where science-based and fact-based study is part of the decision-making. And I think that as we approach this discussion, a discussion that's way overdue, both Congress and Biden administration have a tremendous opportunity to bring our mining laws into this 21st century. As the chairman said in his opening statement, we're still regulating mining industry with a law that was written in the mid-19th century. Everything about mining in the American West has changed in the last 150 years, except for our mining laws and the legacy of abandoned hard rock mines.
Hi, Dana. Yeah. I did.
Somebody needs to go on mute.
Yes, thank you.
If you're not speaking, please go on mute.
If you're not speaking, please go on mute.
Thank you. And the legacy of abandoned hard rock mines, and you know that legacy is that we know of over 500,000 abandoned mines in the 12 western states. That becomes the responsibility of the taxpayer in the United States, and because there is no requirement and no royalties paid and no way and some of the worst cleanups on Superfund sites are in abandoned mine sites. Mining reform means protecting special and sacred places, requiring modern environmental standards, and no longer simply giving away our publicly owned minerals to exploitive international mining companies without any condition. There's a lot of interest in Congress right now about critical minerals, as the chairman mentioned, especially minerals that are important to defense and renewable energy. But we cannot use 19th century mining laws to create a 21st century energy policy, however. We shouldn't sacrifice sacred sites, tribal sacred sites, wilderness, national forests, public health, just because the metals coming from the ground would go into a wind turbine or a solar panel or an electric vehicle battery. The search for balance and a productive strategy for accessing minerals is pointless to have that discussion when we'd have a 150-year-old law in place, a law that places the mining industry in the power position and the secure position in terms of that extraction, and the public interest, water, the environment, public health, indigenous communities are powerless in that same position. And when we look at the conflicts that are going on around us, around the issue of mining and where it's sited and the consequences of that mining operation, whether we're looking at Boundary Waters, Oak Flats, Bears Ears, the Grand Canyon, these legal struggles and very much public struggles are in direct result of a law that limits the ability of the federal government to look at options and make requirements for any extraction. It is about the indigenous people not being considered in the process and having meaningful consultation. Those are also that frustration on the part of the public, that frustration on the part of public health advocates, that frustration on the part of taxpayers is part and parcel of the reason that the law must reflect reality, and the reality of these times, not the reality of those times. And I hope that today's hearing makes it clear that the legislation that we are going to be pursuing is an important piece of legislation, and we will be introducing it later in the year. The issue I also want to make is that that I hope today's hearing makes it clear why this legislation is necessary to reform the mining law, but also highlights the places where we also might have agreement. I want to thank the chairman, Lowenthal, for scheduling this hearing. I look forward to the discussion. And in that discussion, I think we have to look at where we are right now, the consequences of a 150-year-old law, and the reform that needs to take place. And as we gather input, and Chairman Lowenthal and myself on the legislation to be filed, it is with that intent to bring us up to date, to instill protections and the public's right to know and accountability into the process, something that is lacking in the law as we speak. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva. I would like to recognize, if he is here, I know he was having difficulty getting here at this moment, Ranking Member Westerman for an opening statement. Ranking Member Westerman, if you're here now, I would like to recognize you, but I know you were having difficulty getting here just at this moment. Not hearing you, I'm going to move forward then, and we'll return to Ranking Member Westerman a little later. I want to thank all the members, those who have made opening statements or will be putting them into the record. I'm now going to turn to our panel of witnesses. Samuel Penny is the chairman of the Nez Perce Tribal Executive Committee. Lauren Duncan is an abandoned mine restoration project manager at Trout Unlimited and serves as a member of the state of Colorado's Mined Land Reclamation Board. Jim Kress is counsel at the law firm Brian Cave Leighton Eisner. Paolo Natali is a principal in the Climate Intelligence Program at RMI, the organization formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute. Deborah Strusacker is co-founder and director of the Women's Mining Coalition. And finally, we have Kathy Bancroft, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will begin, and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute your microphone to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I'm also going to allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Chairman Penny.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Sam Penny. I'm a member of the Nez Perce Tribe and serve as chairman of the Nez Perce Tribe Executive Committee, the 9-member governing body of Nez Perce Tribe. I'd like to thank Chairman Lowenthal for the invitation to testify on the General Mining Law of 1872 and its profound impact on Nez Perce Tribe's members, its treaty reserved rights, and its trustful relationship with the United States. Since time immemorial, the Nez Perce Tribe, or Nimiku, have occupied a geographic area encompassing a large part of what is now today Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana. In order to protect its people, culture, and way of life, the Nez Perce tribe entered into a treaty with the United States government in 1855. The 1855 treaty reserved to the Nez Perce tribe 7.5 million acres of its more than 13 million acre homeland for its exclusive use and benefit. The 1855 treaty also reserved to the Nez Perce tribe rights central to maintaining Nez Perce cultural way of life. Unfortunately, the Nez Perce tribe's 1855 treaty was quickly followed by the discovery of gold within the tribe's reservation boundary and a rapid influx of miners onto the tribe's newly established reservation. Rather than excluding the miners, the United States sought a new treaty with the tribe. The United States 1863 treaty with the Nez Perce tribe, which we call the Steele Treaty, forced the tribe to cede to the United States approximately 90% of the lands it had reserved in its 1855 treaty, prompting the Nez Perce War of 1877, in which Chief Joseph and 700 Nez Perce were forced from their homeland on an over 1,100-mile exodus through 4 states. Over 200 Nez Perce men, women, and children died or were wounded during the 1877 war, and many more Nez Perce were permanently displaced from their homeland. Beginning early in the 20th century, miners again arrived in the Nez Perce tribe's Aboriginal territory to seek their fortune, this time in the headwaters of East Fork, South Fork Salmon River, which they named the Stigma Mining District. Since then, miners and mining companies have come and gone from the area, extracting almost 1 million ounces of gold, over 2 million ounces of silver, along with tungsten and antimony. They have left behind a legacy of mining pits, tailing piles, and other heavy disturbed sites, and continue to discharge harmful pollutants into the headwaters of East Fork, South Fork Salmon River, and block fish passage into the river's headwaters. And now Perpetua Resources is proposing another mine in the Stigma Mining District. The company's proposed gold mine would be one of the largest in the nation, with more than double the disturbed area within the Stigma Mining District, would create open mining pits and produce hundreds of millions of tons of additional mine waste and tailings that will be almost certainly also require wastewater treatment and perpetuated. Perpetua Resources proposed mine threatens the Nez Perce tribal members' ability to continue to fish, hunt, gather, and pasture areas within surrounding areas of the Stigma Mining District and in waters directly downstream of Stigma Mining District. Pursuant to Nez Perce tribe's treaty reserve right, the company's proposed mine also threatens Nez Perce tribe's fisheries work directly downstream of the Stigma Mining District. The tribe expends approximately $2.79 million annually on this work as part of its broader fish work in the Columbia River Basin to arrest the decline of Snake River spring and summer Chinook, salmon, Snake River steelhead, and the bull trout in the watershed. As a result, and deeply negative experience of miners and mining, Nez Perce believes a cultural and legal shift around its mining is urgently needed. Mining is not and should not be presumed to be the highest and best use of our federal public lands. Mining, exploration, and mines should not displace treaty reserve rights and other important resources, including spiritual and recreation values on federal public land. Federal land management agencies must be empowered to say no to mining projects. For this reason, the Nez Perce tribe support Chairman Verhavia's efforts to provide thoughtful and needed reforms to general mining law of 1872, reforms that better reflect and honor the United States' unique relationship and its treaty trust obligations to Indian tribes and efforts to improve government-to-government consultation with tribes. The tribe has provided specific recommendations for the legislation, and it's in our written testimony submitted to the subcommittee. And the tribe previously provided recommendations to the Government Accountability Office for its report released yesterday on the federal systems used to manage hard rock mining on federal public lands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Penny. The chair now recognizes Ms. Duncan for 5 minutes of testimony. Welcome to the subcommittee, Ms. Duncan.
Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Stauber, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify and draw attention to the issue of abandoned mines across the West. My name is Lauren Duncan. I work as an Abandoned Mine Lands, or AML, project manager for Trout Unlimited. I live and work out of Rollinsville, Colorado, right in the heart of Colorado's mineral belt. Trout Unlimited, or TU, is a member-based organization with more than 300 members and supporters across the country. We are collectively aligned behind the mission of protecting and restoring cold water fisheries and their watersheds. The General Mining Law of 1872 encouraged the development of mining across the West, but neglected to account for the widespread impacts the mining expansion could have into the future. Today, as has been mentioned, there are as many as 533,000 abandoned hard rock mines across the 13 western states. In Colorado alone, there are an estimated 23,000 potentially hazardous abandoned hard rock mine features. The majority of these sites pose continuous risks to the environment and human health, while also carrying high reclamation costs. On average, federal agencies spend an approximate $287 million annually to address hazards at abandoned hard rock mines, but much more is needed to tackle this immense problem. To help address widespread environmental impacts associated with these mines, TU has developed a robust AML Reclamation Program. To date, our program's projects have restored over 200 stream miles across the West and reclaimed 155 acres of mine-impacted lands. Our technical, partner-based approach has led us to becoming an industry leader in AML reclamation today. Most AML projects are incredibly complex and require expertise and collaboration from multiple partners to address completely. In Colorado, members from federal, state, local, and NGO groups work together to characterize and complete reclamation at AML sites on private and public lands. Of these projects, TU-led efforts would not have been possible without the support of our private industry mining partners. Those organizations like Freeport-McMoRan, Newmont Mining, Tiffany & Co. Foundation, Integra Resources, Kinross Gold Corp., and Ure Silver Mines Incorporated provide valuable financial support that allows TU to leverage matching funds to accomplish meaningful reclamation. The impact of this reclamation work reaches beyond the environmental improvements associated with addressing each mine. Through hiring local contractors, purchasing local materials, and utilizing local services during construction, our projects support the economies of the communities where we work and live. Taking into account average project costs, the revenue correlates to approximately $1.2 million annually contributed to Colorado's economy as a result of TU's reclamation projects. While TU and our partners have successfully completed over 40 AML projects since 2004, significant barriers still exist when approaching any AML cleanup. These challenges include the need for Good Samaritan legislation and a need for a dedicated funding source to address abandoned mine reclamation. By passing Good Samaritan legislation, Congress can provide targeted liability protections while also holding Good Sams accountable to the terms of their permits. Not only would these projects result in improved environmental conditions, but a federal Good Sam remediation program, coupled with a dedicated funding source, would allow numerous cleanups to move forward, fostering a restoration economy and creating jobs in local communities. TU is encouraged to see the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee include an amendment to the Energy Infrastructure Act that authorizes up to $3 billion for a program that would address abandoned hard rock mines. We hope this legislation moves forward to support the financial resources necessary to address the thousands of abandoned mines across the West. Coordination between federal, state, local, and NGO groups offers an opportunity to address AML sites through reclamation efforts, and there are numerous positive project examples to show the economic, social, and environmental advantages of our work. However, lack of Good Samaritan legislation and a lack of a dedicated funding source for NGOs and agencies have hindered the scale of reclamation efforts. As these challenges are addressed, new opportunities for expanded AML reclamations will arise, and organizations like ours will be able to continue our work towards cold, clean, fishable water for all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kress for your 5 minutes of testimony. Welcome to the subcommittee, Mr. Kress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you and the ranking member and other members inviting me today to discuss this important issue. My background is that I've been a mining lawyer in private practice in the United States for more than 30 years, working with both the location system and the leasing systems on our federal lands. I'm an author of the American Law of Mining chapter on federal mineral leasing that includes hard rock mineral leasing that we're discussing today. The present context, unlike the past-looking title of the hearing, in looking at the mining law, is whether it can help us with our 20th century, our 21st century needs to meet the demands of clean energy and decarbonization. The Biden administration has set ambitious goals to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by 2030, and to produce 100% of U.S. electricity from carbon pollution-free sources by 2035. That's only 9 to 15 years from now. The International Energy Agency has said that over the next 20 years, demand for the minerals that we will need to do that will increase dramatically. Lithium over 4,000%, graphite over 2,500%, copper very significantly, nickel, and all of the other metals that we need for this clean energy transition. The U.S. has critical shortages of many of these needed minerals that were identified in the White House's supply chain report, 100-day report, and we need to increase domestic production. Unfortunately, the barely used federal hard rock leasing system is not the tool to substitute for the tried and tested location system. The GAO released a report yesterday that talks about tribes, states, and foreign governments, using leasing, but that report actually, the headline's kind of buried in it. It's not about whether you have mining claims or agreements. The U.S. location system is actually similar to the other countries that have that are successful in mining, Canada and Western Australia. There are two critical characteristics that a law must contain: open access and a right to the minerals upon discovery, subject to environmental permitting. Without a two-stage consent, prospecting then lease, not only of the mineral agency, but of the surface agency that exists under our mineral leasing law. These characteristics exist in Canada using mining claims in many of the provinces there, but elsewhere using permits that are filed by the miner with this principle of self-initiation and open access. They do not require consent of the agency like the U.S. leasing system. In our Western states, all of the states with public lands do use a leasing system, but if you look at the terms of those leases, they provide for easy access to the mineral rights and for long terms for those agreements. The agreement that the GAO has recommended that be adopted, the system, actually is from acquired lands. Only 10% of our lands, according to the GAO's report released yesterday, are on acquired lands. Only 53 leases exist at the moment and 8 prospecting permits, of which only 7 were producing as of a couple of years ago. This is not a tested system for hard rock mining. The leases on acquired lands require multiple consents from both the BLM as mineral manager and the surface agency, often the Forest Service, before you can even prospect. And lease issuance after discovery is conditioned again on consent. The transition to a leasing system will take decades. In my written testimony, I've outlined several examples of this, but there are more. We don't have that kind of time to do land use planning, create a new system, and have litigation over how that system works. We have a system that works. It's the mining law. One other thing I'd like to add in my testimony, I've had the privilege of testifying before the Committee on Hard Rock Mining royalties on at least 2 occasions, and before the Senate Natural Resources Committee. We've looked at the 8% to 12.5% gross royalty before, and I and every expert that's testified before you has shown, and global comparisons with the other mining countries show, that an 8 to 12.5% royalty would be the highest royalty that we are familiar with for hard rock minerals. The GAO's 2019 royalty study found the same. Nothing has changed. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kress. The chair now recognizes Mr. Natali. Welcome to the subcommittee, Mr. Natali.
Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Stauber, distinguished members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify and for your leadership on these critical issues. My name is Paolo Natali, and I'm a principal at RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute, a global nonprofit headquartered in Colorado. I have been asked today to provide information about our experience with repurposing closed mine sites. At RMI, we have been advising mining companies about installing renewable energy facilities in both active and closed sites through the Sunshine for Mines program. We've operated globally, but we had significant scopes of work in the continental US, especially in the Southwest. We saw the difficulties in former mining communities when the largest employer closes its operations. We brought hope. At a commissioned mining site, which is otherwise a liability to the owner and to the surrounding community, can be transformed back into an asset that contributes to the energy transition. And this sits squarely within the strategic interest of the United States. My testimony today intends to convey two messages. The first, we found that renewable energy is a good use for brownfields because mainly using disturbed land avoids the use of a greenfield, as the land at mining sites tends to be already degraded, so installing new infrastructure doesn't impact the pristine habitats. And in most cases, also, the brownfield already possesses infrastructure, such as roads and transmission lines, which can reduce costs. There are success stories of this in the US. The Mission Mine in Arizona has a 35 megawatt facility, solar, that generates electricity to power over 5,000 homes. The Dave Johnston coal mine in Wyoming, a closed site, has 158 wind turbines that currently provide electricity for over 60,000 homes. I want to bring the challenges of this to the attention of the subcommittee too, and why new legislation can help. For closed sites to truly come back to life, a stronger support system needs to be put in place. In many areas of the US, it's the local utility that tenders new generation capacity. If brownfields are to be put in the position of offering better project economics than greenfields, the legislator should facilitate this via incentive mechanisms. The land might need additional work to be structurally safe for a facility. Transmission lines might need refurbishment, and the closed site might be remote from the grid. And the grid itself might need a certain type of generation profile to bring power at specific hours of the day, for example, in the evening when demand is high and the sun is not shining. At any rate, demand for renewables is growing, which brings me to my second message for the subcommittee, which is about the mining industry itself. In our work with our clients, it's very apparent that what is not mined in the US gets mined somewhere else. Our preference is that what is produced be produced in a location where legislation is strong enough to provide environmental safeguards, and the US can be such a place. Consider that the clean energy transition is a tidal wave. At RMI, we advocate for an energy transition that is resource efficient. That is, where energy demand doesn't just grow, but is kept in check by growing energy efficiency. In other words, use less energy to produce the same result. But we cannot impose that mentality, and we acknowledge that the end result may be more similar to the recent World Bank projections that Mr. Kress just before me also quoted, that see energy demand and therefore the demand for certain critical minerals grow significantly. We're not talking about a niche industry here. Since 2014, renewable energy is the majority of the new installed power generation capacity in the US, and it accounts for 80% of planned new build in 2021. This is not going to stop, and this will require especially conductors and battery minerals. Many of these minerals are mined in the US, and this is an industrial growth opportunity for mining companies, for their workforce, for the local communities, and for the supply chains that depend on mined materials. The industry itself generated revenues of over $30 billion in the US in 2020. That's on par with the soy industry, for example, which is the top 3 agricultural industry in the US. We welcome the discussion about a reform of the old mining law because it offers the opportunity to include mining in a true plan fit for the century we live in, a plan in which America brings old regions back to life with industries that will give the US a strategic advantage on global competition. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm of course happy to take questions on any and all of this later during the hearing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Natali. The chair will now recognize Ms. Strusacker for 5 minutes of testimony. But welcome to the subcommittee, Ms. Strusacker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Stauber, and members of the subcommittee. The U.S. has a serious hard rock mining problem, but is not a toxic legacy, as the title of this session asserts. The problem is that the U.S. mineral production is declining. We do not produce the minerals we need to achieve the nation's clean energy objectives, keep our military strong, provide our manufacturing sector with essential raw materials, build and maintain crucial infrastructure, and strengthen domestic supply chains. The Biden administration's ambitious goals to reduce carbon emissions requires minerals, lots of minerals. Overhauling the mining law to reduce mining on public lands is completely at odds with the administration's clean energy objectives. Rather than looking backwards to the toxic legacy left from a bygone era of mining when there were no environmental laws or regulations for mining or anything else, this hearing should focus on increasing domestic mining to meet the soaring demand for critical minerals for the clean energy revolution. When 2 other women geologists in Reno, Nevada, and I started the Women's Mining Coalition in 1993, we never could have imagined that nearly 30 years later, we would still be debating the mining law. But today, the mining outlook is bleak compared to 1993. Domestic mineral production has significantly declined, and mineral imports have dramatically increased. Our mineral supply chains are vulnerable, and we are dangerously dependent on other countries, some of which are adversaries, for the minerals we need. According to the White House's June 2021 supply chain report, strategic and critical minerals are the building blocks of a thriving economy and a strong national defense. They impact hundreds of sectors of the U.S. economy and enable more than $3 trillion in domestic value-added industry, downstream manufacturing, and service sectors. Critical minerals are used in nearly every electronic device, and they support high value-added manufacturing and high-wage jobs. But the White House says that critical mineral supply chains are at serious risk of disruption, and essential civilian industries would bear the preponderance of harm from a disruption. Upending the mining law by enacting the pie-in-the-sky royalty, the unworkable leasing system, the duplicative environmental and permitting requirements, and the new land use restriction in Chairman Grijalva's and Lowenthal's mining law reform agenda would cause further declines in mineral exploration and production, exacerbate our reliance on foreign minerals, and obstruct the Biden administration's aggressive plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The 30 years long mining law debate has always overlooked a key fact, and that is that mining impacts only a minute fraction of public lands, a mere 1/20th of 1%. Nevada is by far the largest exploration and mining state, with over half of the country's mining claims. But Nevada has only 26 active metal mines, and gold production has dropped from 9 million ounces in 1998 to under 5 million ounces in 2019. During this period, Nevada mines have created life-changing benefits in rural Nevada, where mining has reduced poverty, funded medical clinics and hospitals, provided scholarships, some of which have specifically benefited Native American students, built schools, upgraded infrastructure, and improved the quality of life. Congress can solve the environmental problems at pre-regulation abandoned mines by enacting liability relief for third parties who propose to reclaim them, just as Ms. Duncan was saying in her testimony. We applaud Trout Unlimited's pioneering abandoned mine accomplishments, and we're really pleased to be on the podium with them today. Domestic mining on just a fraction of public lands can provide the minerals needed to combat the impact of climate change that is contributing to the widespread drought and wildfires ravaging vast swaths of Western public lands. It's time to stop demonizing the past, pre-regulation mining, and end this decade-long threat to rewrite the mining law. Instead, Congress should focus on increasing domestic mineral production from the cleanest and safest mines in the world by keeping public lands available for mining and eliminating the permitting delays and risks that have diminished domestic mineral exploration and production. Just as we have since 1993, the Women's Mining Coalition stands ready to work with Congress on this issue of national importance, and we truly appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Strusacker. The chair recognizes our final panelist, Ms. Bancroft, for 5 minutes of testimony. Welcome to the subcommittee, Ms. Bancroft.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee, Inaniane Kathy Jefferson Bancroft, Numanu, Payasunado we Nukimadu. Thank you for this opportunity to testify about reforms to the federal government's mining laws and rules. My name is Catherine Bancroft. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or TIPO, for the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Tribe. Lone Pine, the town where I was born and raised, sits in a place we call Payahunadu, meaning the place where the water always flows. Along the eastern edge of California, where elevations reach 15,000 feet in the Sierra to below sea level on the other side in Death Valley National Park, I see the same amazing views that my ancestors looked at for millennia. Our homeland since time immemorial is now under threat of irrevocable destruction. A Canadian company, K2 Gold, is conducting exploratory drilling in hopes of advancing gold mine in Conglomerate Mesa, a pristine area traditionally stewarded by my people. The mesa sits in the middle of 22,000 acres of a wilderness inventory unit filled with natural beauty and wildlife. It hosts a vibrant and productive ecosystem of rare and unique desert plants, as well as culturally sensitive and archaeologically significant artifacts. We have relied on these lands for traditional uses, including subsistence hunting, gathering edible and medicinal plants, and engaging in traditional ceremony. K2 Gold is not the first, and it won't be the last. Mine claim staking throughout our traditional lands, including Conglomerate Mesa, has privatized an entire region we hold sacred. This new company has ignored our concerns and suggestions to avoid causing irreparable harm. The General Mining Law of 1872 is a relic from the U.S. government's Western expansion, which resulted in the seizure and destruction of indigenous people's land and resources across this country. The federal government has the power to insist on more meaningful tribal consultation that seeks to achieve free, prior, and informed consent. New rules can clarify the federal government's ability to deny mines that would cause unnecessary or undue degradation to our resources. For decades, the mining company has blocked much-needed 1872 mining law reform that would fairly treat impacted communities. From Oak Flat to Thacker Pass, the cycle of oppression continues. The voices of indigenous communities are pushed to the side in the name of progress that creates disproportionate impact and distributes inequitable benefits. A just, equitable, and fair 21st century renewable energy transition demands meaningful reform of these laws and rules. Minerals must be sourced more responsibly by strengthening oversight ensuring alternatives are adequately considered, and requiring meaningful tribal consultation. The transition must not touch off a mining rush like that which historically killed or displaced indigenous and other marginalized people, destroyed sacred cultural resources, scarred landscapes, and polluted water. On July 11th, my community commemorated the strength and resiliency of our people by tracing a portion of the route that our ancestors were forced to march, not long before this mining law was made, by a military who deceived them with false promises of food and shelter. Once inside the walls of Fort Independence, they were imprisoned in caves until almost 1,000 of them were forced to walk about 250 miles to Fort Tejon. Many were killed, escaped, or died along the way. My great-grandmother, then a child, managed to escape Fort Tejon and return by herself to our ancestral home. Her life is a testimony on how much this place means to us. I dream for the next generation to feel genuinely seen by the United States government in a way that my ancestors and I never have been. They must know that our history is acknowledged and that our values are reflected in the decisions that affect our land. While I'm honored to hold the title of TIPO from the DOI and NPS, no title or job description can ever equal the innate responsibility I have always felt to care for our land. The land provides for us, heals us, nurtures us, and defines us as Indigenous people. Our culture and our homeland and our lives are inextricably interwoven. Thank you again for allowing me to share my testimony. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bancroft, and thank all the witnesses for their testimony. The chair is now going to recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask to the witnesses. I'm going to recognize Chair Grijalva for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Penny and Ms. Bancroft, let me ask both of you a question to respond to this. And opponents of reforming the mining law of 1872, we've heard some of it today, often say that the United States has the most stringent environmental regulations in the world. They say we don't need to update the rules and regulations for mining because it's protected by other laws like NEPA and the Clean Water Act. Even considering these environmental regulations, do either of you think we have the best mining laws in the world and the laws that exist on the books now, the 1872, should not be changed and left as is, which is also something we've heard today? Let me ask Chairman Penny and Ms. Bancroft if they would like to comment and have an additional follow-up question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Sam
Yes.
Penny, Nez Tribe.
Yes.
So as I expressed my testimony, Nez Tribe believes a lot of the laws do not protect the treaty reserve rights of Nez Tribe. I'll take another good example. You mentioned NEPA and other federal laws. Right now we're dealing with the plight of the salmon in the Northwest. And, applicable federal laws in that case. We continue to see the decline of the resource for the Nez Tribe. So as far as mining in our area, and as I mentioned in the testimony, when we talk to different people, we talk about how our treaty is ratified by the United States Senate under the Federal Trust Responsibility that we expect all federal departments, agencies, and bureaus to honor that federal trust responsibility on the resources. But the fact is, I can use myself as an example. In the 1960s, I used to go fishing with my family from anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks in the South Fork Salmon River area. And we would stay there, fish, and gather other medicinal and other edible foods during that time. But, we hardly ever do that anymore because the resource is so depleted in the area. So, many times the federal laws do not work in the best interests of tribes, and many times we find ourselves having to use other process to make sure that our treaty rights are protected for our people. Thank you.
Ms. Bancroft? Do you have any response to the same question?
Yes. Let me see. The mining laws definitely need to change to incorporate free formal prior consent of the tribe. That the tribes are the most vulnerable people in this process. Nobody is listening to what we have to say. We know this land, we care for it, and I've learned in this process that an overwhelming majority of these mines are within 30 miles of reservations, and I look out my window and I said, "Whoa! I can see right here in about 20 miles is Conglomerate Mesa," and so this is near and dear to me. These mining laws, as long as they regard mining as the highest priority and best use of this land, we basically have our hands tied and nobody's listening to what we say. Thank you.
Let me just, if I may, the issue of consultation with tribes in good faith, in meaningful consultations, the federal government, in relationship to that government-to-government mandate, falls short on that, and on the consultation process with tribes. And the mining companies are also part of that discussion. Where do you see the dilemma? Is the dilemma that it should be a government-to-government relationship, or should the mining companies be also part of that consultation directly with tribes? Let me ask either one of you. Because I get that response from mining companies. We try to reach out to the San Carlos Apaches, but they only want to deal with the federal government because it's federal land. Yet, the mining company then says, we tried everything and they won't listen to us. So, my question is, where do you see this falling?
So, Nesper's tribe. So,
yeah, please.
On the government-to-government consultation, many times it does fall short. I can use, for example, the Stigma mining area. We have consultation on a government-to-government basis with as a governmental agency, and we submit comments. We have meetings, but many times we find that our input is many times disregarded, and we find ourselves time and time and again having to go back and say, what happened to the comments that we submitted? And also, from time to time, we run into issues where we're not, in order to do the tribal analysis, we're not provided all the necessary information in a timely manner. So it puts the tribe at a distinct disadvantage by not having all available information on the government-to-government consultation process.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back. Appreciate the courtesy.
Thank you, Chair Grijalva. I now recognize Ranking Member Stauber for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Strusacker, thank you for joining us today. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, our country struggles with import reliance for a vast number of our minerals, with much of it coming from the communist country of China. We know China has influence over nearly every critical mineral supply chain in one way or another. What would happen to our ability to manufacture electric vehicles, solar panels, and other technology, to include providing for the defense of our nation, if we could not rely on supply from China?
Thank you, Ranking Member Stauber, for that question. Well, there would be very serious problems for our country. And you don't have to rely on my answers. I mean, the White House report that was issued last month basically paints a very serious picture of what would happen. It says we are at serious risk of having disruption of our mineral supplies, and that many, many essential civilian aspects of our economy would be impacted. So, it doesn't make any sense for us to import minerals from China, which of course is an adversary, or even from countries that may be aligned with our interests, when we can produce those minerals here from highly regulated, clean and safe mines, where we have American jobs and where we minimize the carbon footprint of getting those minerals. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to transport minerals from across the globe. So I think we have an obligation, when we can get minerals that we have here, we can produce them from the cleanest and safest mines in the world, and we can minimize our carbon footprint. In doing so, strengthen our supply chains and dramatically reduce the vulnerability, our current vulnerability, to China and other hostile countries.
And I think,
very much disrupt our system of life.
yeah, Ms. Strusacker, I think you mentioned, you made the comment, we have an obligation. I also believe we have a responsibility to do it here. We have the best environmental standards and the best labor standards, so I agree with you. Mr. Kress, how difficult are these resources to find? I know it's a massive undertaking, but could you characterize the time it takes and the money it costs to permit exploration, explore, permit a mine, and then mine?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. It takes decades to do this. An example is the discovery of the metals of the Duluth complex up in your district. Those metals were discovered in 1948 and have yet to be mined. And the basically under the National Academy of Sciences study done in 1999, they estimated only 1 out of every 1,000 mineral exploration operations becomes a mine. So it's a needle in a haystack, and it's definitely not helped by the delays and increasing delays that companies have experienced in permitting. Once you discover a mineral, which can take 10 to 20 years, then the permitting process can take 7 to 10 or even more years. I'm familiar with operations that have been trying to get permits for 20 years. So that kind of delay has been a problem. If you do this in a leasing system, you have additional delays because there are these consents needed before you can even get a prospecting permit or a lease. You have to go back for those consents twice.
And Mr. Kress, I think you had mentioned, and I don't mean to interrupt you, my time's limited here. You talk about the process. Not only are you exploring, but once you put a plan in place, it does take years. In the case of Polymet, they're into their 19th year of permitting, approximately $500 million in the permitting process without one shovel in the ground. And that's why, we know we can do better. There is permitting reforms that can be discussed, and I think it's important to do. My last question, could either of you both describe this process in countries like China, who we rely on for minerals, and would the reforms discussed today make it easier or harder to continue competing with China and other foreign adversarial nations who have no labor or environmental standards? I have 3 seconds. One of you.
Harder.
It'd make it higher. Ms. Strusacker?
And there's absolutely no question it would make it much harder, maybe impossible.
Thank you very much. That's what I assumed your answers would be. Mr. Chair, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I'm going to recognize now myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Natali, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and as Chairman Grijalva has already spoken about, we're not opposed to new mining on the Democratic side. We just want to see it done in a more responsible way And that just isn't happening right now under the framework of the mining law of 1872, Mr. Natali. As you mentioned in your opening statement, that more responsible mining practices could give the United States a new competitive advantage. Can you explain that further?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. Essentially, companies that operate the supply chains downstream of mining, the buyers, have started to scrutinize the environmental footprint of the entire supply chains. And they are under pressure from consumers, from their investors, from policymakers to do so. And some of these companies already want to procure commodities that can prove to have been produced with environmental standards. And this will be a valuable attribute to have. And if mining companies that produce in the US can provide that attribute, that provides a competitive advantage to the country.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn to Ms. Duncan from Trout Unlimited. Ms. Duncan, you're from Colorado, a state with significant mining industry, and the state is in fact the home of the internationally known Colorado School of Mines. Do you agree that there's a way to strike a proper balance between mining and all other benefits provided by public lands?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the reference to my alma mater in your question. Mining in the U.S. has come a long way over the past century and a half, as we've all discussed today. But modern and thoughtful laws can help foster a fair balance between mining and other public land uses as we move forward. We think that ensuring equal footing of all public land use, including conservation, will allow public land managers to make sound decisions and enable communities to also benefit from the economic opportunities provided by mining, while also benefiting from recreational and tourism revenue of surrounding and conserved public lands.
Thank you. I'm going to follow that up. And if we updated the mining law of 1872, how would that deal with the conflicts that we find between mining companies and local communities? What would be would there be a consequence in terms of the types of conflicts that we would see? Or would it impact those conflicts if we updated the law?
I do think that updating the law could reduce those conflicts. Including a fair royalty in an updated reform could help mines contribute back to the communities where they operate. And this opportunity could help build bridges where there have been challenges in the past. Coupled with existing standards and responsible operations, the addition of fair royalties could help mines and communities coexist.
Thank you. I want to move then to Chairman Penny and Ms. Bancroft together. This is for the two of you. Either one can jump in and answer this. Chairman Penny, your tribe is concerned about a project on Forest Service lands, and Ms. Bancroft, you're dealing with the Bureau of Land Management, but many of your concerns are similar. Do either of you believe that the current regulations at either agency, Forest Service or BLM, are they adequate? You want to just jump in, either one of you? Penny, are the current regulations at the Forest Service, are they adequate? Or Ms. Bancroft at the Bureau of Land Management, are they adequate, the regulations?
They're definitely not adequate because they do not have a say other than how a project is done. So reform of these mining laws, I think, pertaining to your last question, would help the community come to a better resolution because you have some choices. Right now, the community feels like we have no choice but to accept this. And we try to put some stipulations on it which may or may not be followed. That's what's scary.
And in 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman Penny, do you have the same feeling about the adequacy of the projects on the regulations on the Forest Service?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, as far as the Forest Service is concerned, any regulations must be consistent with our treaty reserved rights, and our treaty reserved rights are on all open and unclaimed land, which Forest Service land and most federal lands are open and claimed, and that's where Nez Perce Tribe membership reserved its treaty reserved hunting, fishing, gathering rights, and any laws need to be compliant.
I'm going to have to cut you off, not because it's not an interesting answer, but because I've gone over it. Since the ranking member is not there, let me just take a look at my notes to see who would be the next of the Republicans. Representative Harrell, are you there?
Do you want this?
You have 5 minutes.
The ranking member's here if you want to go to him next.
Ranking member
Westerman is here.
Oh, Ranking Member Westerman is there. Welcome back, Mr. Westerman. You have now recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Representative Harrell, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. As I look at data from around the world, everything from coarse aggregates down to rare earth minerals, it seems that the U.S. is lagging behind the rest of the world in mining and in production of resources. Ms. Strusacker, if I understand correctly, there are only 26 active mines in Nevada, and Nevada is our country's largest mining state. The fact that we have so few mines is surprising to me and concerning. Maybe it shouldn't be when you look at the world production of minerals and resources. But my question is there enough mining to justify development of a federal royalty program? And what kind of return should we expect to the taxpayer if a high royalty rate were suddenly put on operators?
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. We don't produce enough minerals here, and putting a high royalty rate on that production would further limit our production. I mean, I too think it is pretty shocking that we only have 26 mines here in Nevada, which is the largest mining state. So in aggregate, there really isn't that much production here in the US on public lands. And you could ask yourself, is there actually enough of a royalty base to make a difference, even if Congress were to enact a royalty provision that hopefully would be more reasonable than the one that's being considered? But I share your concerns.
So when I visit with USGS about the mineral availability in the U.S., I'm told we've got more than enough minerals and resources to supply all of our demands domestically. So there must be another reason already why we're not producing here in the U.S. and why we're so heavily reliant on other countries, often Russia and China, for our resources. Can you elaborate on why we're already not competitive with other countries and why this could make us even less competitive?
Yes, thank you. The reason why we are so reliant on other countries and we're not competitive right now is because we have a very burdensome, slow, and risky permitting process that has significantly caused the decline of the U.S. mining production ability. We can improve that. We can streamline that permitting process and still keep all of the very stringent laws and regulations that we have in place so that we can take advantage of and responsibly develop the wonderful mineral endowment that we have here in this country. The USGS is correct. We have domestic resources of many of the minerals that we need.
So maybe is there a possibility maybe for a compromise out there where we start developing more of these resources that we're so abundantly blessed with, and then maybe look at some kind of a royalty or a fee rate or changing the structure of it? But it seems to me if we just put more cost onto an already limited production, we're just going to drive production down lower, and nobody's going to benefit from that other than Chinese and Russian producers of minerals and elements.
Well, I think you're right. There is certainly a happy medium to reach here. And I want to point out that the industry for many, many years has been at the table. We're willing to pay a royalty, but it has to be a reasonable royalty. I think you can look to the states that either tax or collect royalties from minings for ways to make that royalty fair. Basically, the royalty owner needs to create conditions for the mining companies to make it acceptable and profitable for them to produce the minerals. And the gross royalties that are being considered certainly don't do that.
I think we often forget that there's two components in the equation. You got price and volume. And if you raise price and you lower volume, you've not maximized any revenue. So if we could look at how to get more volume off of the U.S. and then maybe a lower price, there could be some win-win situation there. I've run out of time and I have more questions. So I do again thank the witnesses, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ranking member, I now recognize Representative Levin for 5 minutes of questions. Representative Levin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Natale, it's a priority for many of us here in Congress to build more renewable energy projects on previously disturbed lands like brownfields and abandoned mine sites. But developers often tell us that it's too expensive to work on these lands because the cleanup work hasn't met their standard for project development. Have you heard similar concerns from people working in the renewable energy industry?
Congressman, yes, we have. This is, of course, very specific to the geography and the situation of a site. For this very reason, stricter standards requiring, for example, the start of remediation during the lifetime of the mine can help. We've also, by the way, advised on active mines, and I mentioned one that is an active site in my testimony where a renewable facility has been built. So when there is a will, there is a way, so to say. And then, of course, I also spoke about the upsides that a brownfield already offers, the existence of roads and power lines, and of course of a community that has grown around the mining site. And that is a mitigating factor to the costs.
You said where there's a will, there's a way. What are some of the other biggest challenges that you see as we need to overcome and develop more renewables on old mining sites?
Well, essentially, as I also mentioned, in many cases there has to be the relationship with the local utility needs to be understood. The local grid will have certain needs, and developing a large renewable energy supply on a site that is not always well positioned compared to the grid is a problem that needs to be solved. Sometimes flexibility with regard to the technology that is adopted. I'm thinking of some work we did in Arizona where there is a large duck curve problem, which is to say that there is an oversupply at certain times of the day. In those cases, if you just suggest to build a solar PV facility, that will not necessarily match the needs of the local utility. Hybrid facilities with battery or other forms of load shifting capacity would help.
Thank you for that. Federal regulations for mining operations and mine reclamation in general are woefully inadequate. BLM's regulations are similar to rules first put in place in 1980, and the Forest Service regulations are even older. Mr. Natale, does that sound like a problem to you, and do you agree that we should probably update these standards so that more lands can support clean energy projects after a mining company walks away?
Mr. Congressman, I'm afraid I'm not an expert on those specific pieces of legislation, so I can get back to you in writing on this. But of course, one thing I can say, that the higher the standard and the better the chance of getting the brownfield to another second life. And also, we should consider that the mining company doesn't really walk away from the site for quite some time. So it's in the best interest of all the parties to be able to reuse the land.
Thank you. I appreciate your follow-up on that. Beyond regulatory updates, do you think more federal funding to clean up abandoned mines would help in terms of building more clean energy projects on old mining lands across the West?
Certainly so, for the simple reason that when the site gets redeveloped, it goes back on a market where project economics dictate the rules. And so if it has been helped in some way, the project economics will look better.
And thinking about the long-term economic development benefits of renewables, what role do you think renewable energy could play in the long-term economic benefit for some of these communities?
So we visited mining communities where the mining site used to be the largest employer. So first and foremost, these communities lose their identity when the mine closes, and the local jobs, of course. So the possibility of a new use and the possibility of incoming industrial growth, for example, having a data center, a manufacturer coming into the region because there is cheap and clean energy. That's certainly one element.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your continued work as we look to develop more renewable energy on some of these sites. And Mr. Chairman, thanks for the hearing. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Representative Levin. I now call upon and recognize Representative Harrell for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this committee today. My first question would go to Ms. Strusacker, and just talking about the importance of the reliance on our own energy development, but we've seen our net import reliance on foreign nations increase over since the 90s, actually, and we clearly are not mining, refining at the same rate that we once did. What are some of the reasons for the decline in U.S. mining, and what are some steps you can think of we can take to increase mining production?
Well, again, thank you for the question. I'll return to the permitting process. I think the fact that the permitting process is so fraught with risks, it takes so long, it costs so much, that it has chilled investment in our mineral sector. And so we've had a decline in the amount of exploration that has been done in this country. And so when you have less exploration, you discover fewer mines. And so that is one of the reasons that our production is declining. And it's declined radically. When the Women's Mining Coalition first started back in 1993, the country didn't need to import lithium. Now we import over 50% of the lithium that we need.
And that brings me to a great kind of a segue. What kind of minerals used in renewable technologies are available in the United States?
Oh, we have a vast array of those minerals. I mean, we have abundant copper resources. Copper is actually the most ubiquitous clean energy mineral because it is used in every single clean energy technology. We have lithium, we have nickel, we have cobalt, we have many of and we have rare earths. We have lithium. We have good supplies of lithium. So it's not for a lack of mineral resources that we import these minerals. It's because the business climate for exploration and mining right now is not favorable.
Right, thank you. And Mr. Kress, one of the things we've heard quite a bit about is the hard rock mining industry doesn't contribute its fair share to the American taxpayer, which I actually disagree with because I think our return on investment comes in the way of laptops, defense, smartphones, etc. But we've also heard accusations that the general mining law allows for giveaways of public land. Can you help us understand that? I don't think it's actually a giveaway, but is that an accurate assessment? Is the land really given away to the mining operations? Can you kind of elaborate on that to some degree?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is not true that the land is given away, even when we have the patenting system. And that the reason is, as the member from Minnesota said, companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to discover, permit, develop, and put a mine into production. And that activity generates taxes and other benefits that actually, so that the royalty is not that important. There was a study done in 2000 that said that in Nevada and Arizona, about 50% of the benefits from those minerals flowed back to the state in the form of taxes of one kind or another. And that's about the high end of acceptable. 40 to 50% is very competitive. So without a royalty, we're actually paying a fair share. The industry is actually paying a fair share.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just really appreciate our industry. I think it's imperative that we rely on American-made products, that we get our energy of all sources from America. And I do appreciate that we're having this conversation of kind of the all of the above approach. We obviously want a clean environment. But the one thing I think that we must take into consideration when we're having these conversations is disposal of the parts and like, for instance, the windmill blades that go into our renewable energies, because I am fearful that this Congress will be having this exact conversation in about 50 years from now, saying, how are we going to dispose of these windmill blades when we know right now they are being buried in the ground around the nation, Wyoming, for instance. This is non-biodegradable material, and yet no one is even talking about that. We're in such a rush to try to put restrictions in place for our natural resources, but we're not even talking about the disposal of such, because again, these windmill blades just don't disappear after they're buried in the ground. So I just think for the committee's sake, we should have that as part of the extended conversation as we talk about energy moving forward. And again, I want to thank the witnesses, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I now call upon Representative McCollum for 5 minutes of questions. Is Representative McCollum there? If not, Representative Huffman, are you there? We'll come back to Representative McCollum. Representative Huffman, are you there? No? Then Representative Dingle.
I am here. Thank you, Mr.
I can see
Chairman.
you. You are there.
Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal and Ranking Member Stober, for convening this hearing to discuss ways to modernize and improve domestic mining and production of critical minerals. This is an important topic that's very important to me, because it's also going to very directly impact the future of the automotive industry, which, as we've discussed already today, is currently transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards electric vehicles. Ensuring that we have the infrastructure to support the EVs is going to be critical to both addressing climate crisis and to ensuring that the United States remains a leader in automotive innovation and not dependent upon China, quite frankly, for the battery development or our competitors in Europe. My colleagues are correct that this is going to require additional production of critical minerals like lithium and nickel. But I also, and why it really, really matters, and I've talked to some of my colleagues on this committee about how we ensure that we're able to develop these minerals in a sustainable and environmental friendly way, but ensure that we do have access to them, because it's critical if we're going to go from the internal combustion engine to batteries. We've got to do this here. But we can't build a 21st century economy on a 19th century mining law. We've got to find ways that we're going to sustainably produce these minerals domestically, meet the needs of local communities, safeguard our environment. And I'm someone that thinks we have to be very transparent in all of it. Dr. Natalie, you mentioned in your testimony that local communities are already playing a critical role in the energy transition. You seem to emphasize that we should be working with local communities to enact plans that best fit their needs. We can't do a one-size-fits-all approach. How important is a transparent, thorough public input process to how does it work, especially when it's in the context of a large, complex projects like mining?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Of course, it is very important, and I need to emphasize that the alignment of interests between the mine and the local community exists because both have a liability that can be turned into an asset. So in our experience, the mining companies we worked with very much valued the input from the local community. And of course, the more publicity is given to these success stories, there's an educational aspect too, in the sense that it's closed sites have been redeveloped into renewable assets, not many of them. And I bet that you hadn't heard about those that I mentioned before. And so it's important, and it's actually our mission to publicize as much as possible that this is a viable way for repurposing closed sites.
Thank you. And I actually would like to have asked more questions because I'm concerned about the rolling back of NEPA and people not understanding the critical role that it plays. But I want to get to one other in my short time. According to the New York Times, in the first 3 months of 2021, U.S. lithium miners like those in Nevada raised nearly $3.5 billion from Wall Street, 7 times the amount raised in the prior 36 months. We know there's going to be commercial demand for domestic production. It's going to be there. We got to build these batteries. How can policies like strong reclamation standards and bonding requirements help improve future remediation efforts so we're not adding to the roughly 500,000 hard rock abandoned mine lands?
I'm afraid this is a little outside my mandate and expertise.
Others of you want to take that?
I'd like to take a shot at it if I could.
Deborah?
Thank you. Thank you very much. We already have some of the strictest environmental rules and bonding requirements of anywhere in the world. The EPA in 2018 found that those bonding regulations and comprehensive environmental laws and regulations already protect the environment. Just to give you an example, here in Nevada, the state of Nevada, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service co-manage over $3.3 billion in reclamation bonds. So there's a guarantee that today's mines cannot become tomorrow's environmental problem, because if for some reason an operator goes bankrupt or doesn't reclaim the mine, federal and state agencies have the money they need to make sure that those mines are successfully reclaimed and safe for the environment.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time, but I do want to say to all of my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, we need straightforward, common sense policies that are going to ensure existing demand for critical minerals is met. And we're going to need to be able to have access to them if we're going to go where we go. But we cannot give up safeguarding our environmental heritage for future generations. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Dingell. I now call upon Representative Gosar for 5 minutes of questions. Representative Gosar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to think the day will come when Congress can approach mining law reform with the seriousness and focus that it deserves. Since I was first elected to Congress, we have had hearings focused on mining law reform. Republicans hold hearings, Democrats hold hearings, some of them serious, some of them like this one, a comic hyperbole from the title through which the hearing was advertised. I mean, really, toxic legacy? Let us be clear about the legacy of American mining. Let's run the list. 2 world wars and a victory in the Cold War. Global manufacturing domination for 2 generations while building the strongest economy on the planet. A standard of living higher than anywhere else on the earth, with lower poverty, greatest middle class, and a society with an upwardly mobile middle class. American mining and American mining law made our nation expand, grow, and gave us the resources and economic growth our nation needed to be successful. Is there any question that we would all have preferred our ancestors in the 1890s maybe would have been better about mining reclamation? Sure. Should our government have been more accountable for the mining we did during World War II and the legacy of the Cold War? Absolutely. However, we have a mining law that once made the United States a global leader in many of the critical industries our nation needed and needs today. Unfortunately, over the last few decades, we have seen our global leadership in this space recede. Now, as we are on the cusp of a global transition and demand for ever greater resources, my colleagues seem committed to stopping domestic mineral development completely. There are an army of reports coming out highlighting the importance of growing our mineral resources to meet the demand of a more electrified future. Already mentioned is the International Energy Agency report on transition, but the United States Geological Survey did an extensive report on minerals independence in December. Just yesterday, the Bank of America issued a report on the shortages in battery minerals that could lead to a shortage of batteries as soon as 2025. These stories aren't just the same hyperbole as this hearing title. They are real analysis of trends in an industry where we see the radical growth in demand, but little or no growth in supply. We need more minerals, and here our colleagues are suggesting that we radically change our method of mining in America to a system where the government will become responsible for resource exploration to decide what prospects are worthy of development. Meanwhile, our enemies in China and Russia are laughing. China is aggressively running Belt and Road projects around the globe, working with cartels in Mexico, paying off governments in Africa, and bringing leverage on South America, all in the pursuit of mineral security for their manufacturing. Against this backdrop, let me ask a few questions. Ms. Strusacker, some of my colleagues across the aisle advocate for adding the substantial irreparable harm provision considered during the Clinton administration to the mining law. How would this SIH impact mining?
Thank you, Congressman Gosar. Substantial irreparable harm, or SIH, would decimate mining because what it basically is, it's an 11th hour site-specific mine veto that gives interest groups the ability to assert that the area where you've invested tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in discovering a mineral deposit and permitting it and trying to develop it, oops, all of a sudden the rug is yanked from underneath you and that land is no longer available for mining. So it would have a very, very harmful effect.
To you again, what kind of opportunities do state, tribes, and local governments have to comment on a prospective mining operation during NEPA and other parts of the regulatory process? Does that stakeholder engagement continue as the mine begins operations?
Thank you. You know, there is abundant opportunity for not only consultation, but I prefer to call it collaboration. A lot of that is done through the NEPA process where everybody has an ability to comment, to suggest alternatives to projects, and those comments are taken to heart. I know of a number of projects where comments from the public have actually refined the project proposal that ultimately got built. Companies today are going the extra mile to work even outside of the NEPA process to interact with stakeholders, to talk to tribal members and leaders, and to try to find that project that meets everyone's needs so that the project can be the best it can be for the environment and for the people that live in and near the mine site. So it's really a matter of people coming together, rolling up their sleeves, and finding that sweet spot through constant communication and collaboration.
You know, it brings to mind the fact that, you know, like in Resolution Copper, you know, they put over $1 billion of reclamation to the old mine site in preparation for doing this mine. They worked in collaboration with everybody. And it just so happens that the San Carlos Apaches wanted jurisdiction over a piece of property that their historian said never was part of their jurisdiction. So I find it very odd, you know, in regards to that. Mr. Chairman, and a question directed to you. You said earlier that you're not against new mining in the United States. With that said, I would like the chairman to list those new mines, the major mines, and the locations to which you have and would continue to support in the United States new mining. I think it becomes rhetorical and ingenuine when we see all these major mines like Resolution Copper that I just alluded to, that has gone through the process, and saying that you support those kind of mines. I'd like to know which one they are, because we constantly hear from your side of the aisle, yes, we're for them, but you never are elaborate about which ones you are for. You're not on. You're not on.
Yeah, you're almost a minute over time. I've given you an extra minute.
Well, you could submit those for the record, because anybody would love to see those. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to recognize Representative McCollum for 1 minute. For 5 minutes, not for 1 minute, for 5 minutes.
Whatever you say, Mr. Chair, I'll make it work.
You have 5 minutes, and that's what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. I thank you for having this hearing. And there's two things that we're kind of talking about, right? the 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines in our nation that, put water at peril, that need to be cleaned up, and how those things move forward. And we're also talking about, mining as it moves forward for our generation and for the generations to come. I want to focus on water. And Mr. Stauber and I are both from Minnesota, and he was talking about some of the reclaimed taconite mines that we have where people do recreate in them, but taconite mining and copper sulfide ore mining and some of the other mining that we're talking about is very different. So the reclamation and the consequence of the impacts it has on water is very different. So, sometimes we like to lump everything together and overgeneralize, but I want to talk about water for a minute. Climate change is making it harder and harder to manage our water resources. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have noted this in committee over and over again as the Western United States is in the midst of a historic drought. 93% of the land in 7 Western states is in drought conditions. 50% of, almost 60% is an extreme drought. So drought's even happening in Minnesota. We have water restrictions of water levels down in the Mississippi River, and that's going to continue from Minnesota as it goes down. So, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Bancroft, you both talked about how water is life. I mean, we don't exist without water to drink. And I want to thank you for, pointing that out. And water is often undervalued. We don't put a price tag on it. So I just want to, kind of reiterate to everybody, one of the reasons why we need to look at this at the time that the mining laws were written and the Clean Water Act was put forward, groundwater wasn't part of the discussion and what we need to do to protect that, not only in the Western states, but all across. So, Ms. Bancroft, the supporters of the current mining law often claim that we have the best environmental protection statutes in the world. But what impacts from a mining industry do you see on water resources? And then, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask Chairman Penny his question too. Can you tell us more about the impacts, Mr. Penny, about the impacts of mining industry on your community water resources? Let's just focus on water for a minute and the safeguards we need to do to protect another natural resource that's essential for life. And so, Ms. Bancroft, if you take a minute, Mr. Chairman Penny, you'd have a minute as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd very much like to address this because living here in Payahunadu, we are very aware of the limited resources, water resources available to us. This valley was we called it Payahunadu, where the water always flows. But if you look at it now, it's a desert because we've lived with over 100 years of water mining. All of our water pretty much goes to the city of LA. To put a mine in this area and the stream amounts of water that they use is crazy. Where are they going to get that water? And they're going to pump it and they're going to destroy the aquifers that we have and draw them down even further so that we are really in danger of survival. I mean, we can't live without water, and that's where we're headed.
Thank you, Ms. Bancroft. Chairman Penny, please.
It has a profound effect on our Nez tribal membership, the water quality. For example, we've done fish consumption surveys, and tribal membership are high consumers of fishery resources. So the human health criteria is very important to the health of our tribal membership. And as far as a fishery resource, we talk about water quantity quite often and about water quality. And we're seeing the water quality, in our area is because of some of the reservoirs and other things that, high water temperatures and destruction of fishery resources. So, the water quality is an important issue with the Nez Perce tribe, and we want to make sure that, that fish can survive, which is the livelihood of many of our tribe members. That's what they depend on for their subsistence. That's what they live on year round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We need to keep in mind that there's other natural resources sometimes impacted by mining, and we need to do it responsibly and resourcefully. I yield back.
Senator McCollum, is Representative Tiffany there?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Well, then you have 5 minutes of questions. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duncan. In regards to AML projects, in your testimony, you talked today about there's barriers, and in your testimony, you said a couple things: impeded by delays, inordinate amount of time and expense to implement a plan. I take it that there is some frustration there in regards to how quickly you can move on some of these projects that you wish to do, working with the people that you do.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, abandoned mine projects can be delayed, but it's typically because we're going through appropriate steps in order to ensure that that project is done correctly.
So some streamlining might be in order in some cases, is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Ms. Strusacker, so we keep hearing about this horrible thing, the 1872 mining law that's not being updated. But haven't laws in our country and in states been updated over the years?
Thank you, Congressman Tiffany, for that question. Yes, of course, these laws have been updated. First of all, the mining law has been updated a number of times. And starting in about 1960, this country, on the federal level, started enacting environmental protection laws that apply to mining like they apply to all other industries. And at about the same time, the Western mining states and other mining states across the country also developed laws to protect the environment and also to require reclamation. So it is incorrect that these laws haven't been updated.
Yeah, and I can second that, because I rewrote the entire mining law as the author in the state of Wisconsin, where we really updated it to protect the environment while also being able to protect local control. Mr. Kress, I take it that converting to a leasing and increased royalties program, will that increase production here in the United States, what's being proposed?
I don't believe that it will. The mining law is a land law. It's a mineral access law. As Ms. Strusacker said, and others have commented, we have a whole suite of environmental laws that exist alongside it, and also public land laws, 150 years worth, that protect lands like wilderness, for fish and wildlife purposes, et cetera, where we no longer allow mining. So I don't believe that we need to update the land part of it. And if we put the leasing system in effect with its, 3 or 4 consents to the mineral right, that just, no one will come. That's essentially what I'm saying.
So you're not optimistic with this package of legislation that it will increase production, is that correct?
That is correct. I've studied it very closely. The last bill was actually based on the most restrictive of the leasing laws. There are, several different leasing laws in the U.S., but the one that requires surface agency consent twice, both to prospect and to mine, and surface and BLM consent twice, is the one that I find really unworkable as an approach.
Real quickly, Ms. Strusacker, we just heard about water and how much water it'll use. I take it in modern mining, you largely recirculate the water that's being used. Is that correct?
Oh, we use as little water as possible. That is correct. So we recycle and reuse whenever we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's think about what we've heard today. I heard from the other side that we're supportive of new mining. This is a win-win, or we can get to a win-win, and we're not opposed to new mining. It resembles to me what we're hearing in regards to the southern border, what I've been hearing down there, that no, we're not going to let incredible amounts of people across the border. We have it under control. We're hearing all those things. That's what we're hearing here today also, is that, boy, we want mining and all the rest. The facts are that this will discourage mining. It is not good for America. And I'd hit on 2 things in closing, Mr. Chairman. One is we're seeing inflation is becoming rampant in the United States, and the American people understand it. And when you look at our natural resources, whether it's wood, oil, or metals, have any of them decreased in price? I'm not seeing any of them decrease in price at this point, and this is only going to exacerbate it in regards to these critical minerals that we need. The second thing is this gives advantage China. Is the 21st century going to be an American century like the 20th century, Or is this going to be the communist Chinese century? Because if we do not produce the minerals necessary, it will be a communist Chinese century, especially when they're using slave labor to produce those solar panels that are being installed here in America. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I now call upon Representative Porter for 5 minutes of questions. Welcome to the subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Chair Lowenthal. Dr. Natali, you testified about how we can transform abandoned mines into renewable energy hubs. And as you know, there are roughly 500,000 abandoned mine lands across 12 Western states, including California. And you testified that at the site of a reclaimed coal mine in Wyoming, 158 wind turbines provide enough electricity for 66,800 households. Can you give any other specific examples of how we can transform abandoned mines into renewable energy hubs? Can you explain a little bit, illustrating if you can, what that means?
Yes, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. In our work, we have seen many similar instances of a mine that gets closed, and from there onwards, the company is still responsible for remediation and reclamation, and essentially that's a liability, and it still needs attention, and so that's when the company becomes actively interested in the redevelopment of the site, and this continues for a very long time. For specific examples of our work or of other people's work in this respect, I should get back to you in writing, but there is plenty.
And do you think if Congress updated current law to incentivize mining companies to build renewable energy projects on future mines and reclaim abandoned mines for this project, do you think if we incentivize that, it would increase the number of renewable energy hubs on abandoned mine land?
Yes, potentially. Of course, that depends on how the mining law is updated. But yeah, there is that definite potential, and that is in fact the reason I'm here talking about that possibility.
Great, thank you. I want to turn now to Ms. Strusacker. How old is the governing statute, the federal statute for mining on public lands?
Well, there are several. If you're talking about the surface management regulations.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the mining law of the dominant regulation, the mining law of 1872. How old is that?
Well, it was originally enacted in 1872 and amended many times since.
Okay, so it was passed 149 years ago. Are you aware of any other industries on public lands that have foundational laws, the foundational framework law that is that old?
The law governing our national forests is almost that old. It was passed in 1890, and it's still in effect.
All right. Oil and gas, of course, operate under a 1920 law. Does the mining industry pay royalties, generally speaking, on public lands?
Well, here in Nevada, for example, mining companies pay royalty. To the federal government, there is no federal royalty, although mining companies for the last 30 years have said they're willing to talk about one. It just has to be reasonable.
Wonderful. I'm excited to see what you, to be able to collect royalties when mining companies use federal public lands. Are there specific performance standards at the federal level to protect surface water and groundwater from the risks of mining?
Yes, absolutely, there are.
And those would include things like the Clean Water Act, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And then there are very specific U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management regulations that require that too.
Okay. And but those laws, the Clean Water Act and the Federal Water Pollution Act, they have been criticized for not having clear and defined standards. We're here today because mines are causing damage to rivers and streams despite those laws. For example, the Clean Water Act does not protect groundwater, as you know. You testified that there is I have one more question on this. What if, despite these environmental laws, something goes wrong and there's pollution? Can the BLM and other agencies issue civil penalties for violating environmental laws?
The regulatory agencies have absolute enforcement mechanisms. They can also
can they issue civil penalties?
They can issue criminal penalties.
Can they issue civil penalties, Ms.
Yes.
Strusacker?
I'm not an expert on that, but they can issue civil or criminal penalties. They can shut you down.
Okay, let me
they
help
can
you.
require you to reclaim the mine.
Strusacker, reclaiming my time. They cannot, in fact, issue civil penalties, and we all know that the standard for criminal penalties is much higher. You testified that there is a, quote, unfavorable business climate for mining, but the law you operate under is 150 years old. There are no royalties collected at the federal level. There are no specific environmental requirements, and there are no civil penalties for violation. So when I hear you say things like bad climate for business, bad climate for mining, who I think is dealing with the bad climate here are the rest of us. It seems to me what mining has is actually a sweetheart situation. With that, I yield back.
Representative Porter, I believe that concludes all the questions that members want. Have I missed any members? And if I have, please just interject at this moment.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Ranking Member Stauber here. Of course, you haven't missed me, but may I please enter into the record two pieces of two articles written by the American Exploration and Mining Association, which are titled Mining's Law, Fifth Amendment Takings Analysis, and another piece of report, American Exploration and Mining Association, and it's sent to our Honorable Chair Grijalva.
Without objection, Mr. Stauber, they will be entered into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
For the record, Mr. Chairman, if you would permit me two items. One is articles and information and studies dealing with the Colorado River, its impact on and the drought, the effects on water in the West, particularly the basin states, and the drawdown from proposed mines at Oak Flats and other areas along that, and what that means, it doesn't mean. I think that the point that was brought up about the relationship between water and mining, this is an extensive use of water in mining operations, at least that I'm aware of, and studies have indicated that. So that's one study. The other study is having to do specifically with the issue of Oak Flats and the midnight rider that was put onto that without any consultation, without any discussion, to permit a land trade of federal land for a mining operation to Rio Tinto, and in doing so, sidestepping any environmental study. And any study that occurs is after the fact, and the mining company is free to ignore that study. That is the problem. Land managers do not have the ability to mandate any option that would be more reasonable in a discussion. That's the problem. And so with that, I yield back and thank you.
Without objection, those two will be entered into the record. Is there any other additional information that members would like to add to the record? If not, I'm going to thank the witnesses for their testimony, the members for their questions. I think we had a full discussion today, and I'm very pleased with how this subcommittee turned out. But the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we're going to ask you to respond to these witnesses in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. I also want to remind the witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey, which is created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitational materials for further information. If there is no further business, without objection, This subcommittee now stands adjourned.